I got a sincere question from a viewer about Buddhism, and Buddhism is one of many topics I cover here on my channel. Before I even get to the question, and before I even get to why I would be the person to answer this question, what my background is, why this question was sent to me, in really broad brushstrokes, we can say that white people approach Buddhism, relate to Buddhism, and convert to Buddhism in a way that's fundamentally different from Asian people. Now, these are broad brushstrokes, these are broad categories, and some people might rightly complain that the category of white people does not include, for instance, black people. I mean, I'm not saying all Westerners, but if you do the research, it's remarkable the extent to which white people from Russia really do relate to and appropriate Buddhism in the same way as white people from Scotland. It's a pan-European pattern from, California to eastern Smolensk, you tell me. I'm now going to have to check on a map where Smolensk is. Sorry. My girlfriend, by the way, is not a specialist in Buddhism at all. I had her come on camera because she might ask some of the same kinds of questions or might show some of the same, confusion as the person who wrote to me asking for help. But broadly speaking, white people convert to Buddhism, appropriate Buddhism, relate to Buddhism, get interested in Buddhism, thinking about abstract concepts first, as a philosophy first and foremost, as an ideology first and foremost. And they leave it to the very end to think about institutions or to think about management, if you put it that way. And if you really spend time with serious Buddhists, whether it's in Sri Lanka or Japan, people who either are Buddhist monks themselves, are aspiring to become Buddhist monks, or any really serious layperson, whether they're a scholar or otherwise who thinks they might, you'll find that Asians who are serious about Buddhism across all of Asia, again, the difference between Sri Lanka and Japan is amazing. It's a huge, diverse continent. The difference between Russia and Scotland in some ways is amazing. But you'll find what they get excited about is they know a particular temple that has a good monk in charge, where the quality of discipline is good, where the conditions are good. And, it's no joke. I mean, and also they talk about those things when they change. Like, this temple in the south of Sri Lanka, it used to be a good place to really study the Dharma, to really practice as a Buddhist monk. But then some of the senior administrators died, and new monks took over, and now it's not good anymore. They really watch those things closely and carefully. So again, this is a broad generalization, but already it sets up, the type of answer I need to provide to this question. If you are concerned because a loved one, a relative, a friend is converting to Buddhism, or is taking the further step of actually becoming a Buddhist monk, which is not becoming a layperson, but joining the religion at an elite level, so to speak, committing their life or committing some years of their lives to Buddhism, it's interesting because I think from an Asian perspective, the response would be, what temple, what order, who's his preceptor? Like, what's the chain of command? And within any one of those Asian societies, people who care about Buddhism, people who know what's going on, would be able to recommend that he talk to a particular monk, that he look at a particular location. The last one I heard something really positive about. I opened this tab here. Within Sri Lanka, the Great Cloud Temple. If you want to search for it in English, the English name is the Great Cloud Temple. And in modern Sinhalese, that's Mahamevnawa. I'm pronouncing Sinhalese as if it were Pali. I was a Pali scholar, but I wasn't a modern Sinhalese scholar. But it really was a kind of sincere excitement. I remember people telling me about this temple, and this particular temple in particular. When we talk about the kind of diversity that exists in Buddhism as a religion, part of it is because it's a very, very ancient religion, and at any given time, modern traditions, superstitions that exist in the world today may have diverged from the ancient tradition to an amazing extent. Put it this way, it is possible for modern Buddhism to be as different from ancient Buddhism as Santa Claus is different from Jesus Christ. Within Christianity, there's no real resemblance from modern Christmas with Santa Claus and Coca-Cola and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. You can't open up the Bible and find Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or the lyrics to the reindeer song. No. Are there any reindeer in the Bible at all? Are there flying reindeer in the Bible? Flying reindeer. It can be that different. And now I have to follow that up with a caveat. That doesn't mean that what's in the ancient texts is completely rational and philosophical and perfect, or that it doesn't contain superstition. It's different superstition. However, there is that kind of diversity within Buddhism. So if someone came to me, and right now that's the kind of question I'm going to answer. If someone comes to me and says, look, my brother or my friend or my son or my daughter or someone I care about is converting to Buddhism, or is, in this case, becoming a Buddhist monk, should I be concerned? there's so much diversity within Buddhism that, of course, the easy answer is to say yes. It always helps to be concerned, but it's true, people are not alarmed in the same way that they're alarmed with, I wouldn't be as alarmed as it would be if someone were even joining the Catholic religion, let alone Islam or Judaism or what have you. But it's true, there's so much diversity within Buddhism that immediately you have to press forward and say, okay, well, what kind of Buddhism are we talking about? The person who sent me this message mentions that she is an atheist, and she may or may not know atheism is compatible with Buddhism. Now, it is completely false to say the Buddha himself was an atheist, or that the Buddhist monks who wrote the original canon, who were alive at the same time as the Buddha and for a couple centuries thereafter, that they were all atheists. It's very clear the majority of them believed in quite a variety of superstitious things. The existence of demons and ghosts and heaven and hell and reincarnation of the afterlife and supernatural punishment for evil deeds. They believed in teleportation and superpowers, not so different from comic book characters, like flying through the sky like Superman. There's a lot of supernatural stuff in the ancient scriptures. And a lot of people will never honestly say to you what I just said to you. There's a lot of dishonesty about that fact at all levels of the religion and all forms of the religion. However, the religion is compatible with atheism. You can be an atheist and be a member of the Buddhist faith. You can be an atheist and be a prominent Buddhist monk, be a career Buddhist monk, so to speak. And, of course, that's not true of Catholicism. You can't really be an atheist and be a Catholic priest or cardinal or something. You can't get very high up in the ranks of Catholicism if you're openly saying you believe there's no God. Needless to say, Islam, I think, is on this on the same page on that one, if not even more so. I mean, apostasy or something that doesn't have that kind of wiggle room. So that in some ways that would be impressive to or shocking to Europeans compared to the religions more Europeans are familiar with, Buddhism has this core philosophy. I can say it to you right now from heart. To live is to suffer. This is also phrased as life is suffering. This is also phrased as all this is suffering, in reference to all this being the world you can see and experience around you. Part 2 is there is no soul. And part 3, not necessarily in this order, by the way, is that all is impermanent, right? So all is impermanent in that historical context meant very different things. It includes, by the way, that the gods they believed in, which are more like demigods in ancient Greece, that they also were not immortal. So even the gods would die of old age. Even the gods could go to hell after they died, interestingly. So I don't know any other religion that's like that. I don't know another religion in which God can die and go to hell for his sins. But whether you think of them as gods or demigods, gods like Indra in ancient India, they were seen as eventually dying
was
and
an
going to
angel,
hell.
right? That went to hell.
Angels are different than gods. Yes, no, you're right. So the most ancient period of Judaism, what's called First Temple Judaism, was actually a polytheistic religion. Good luck getting a rabbi to be honest with you about that. And that is actually still recorded in the most ancient parts of the Bible, where there wasn't just one God, there were many. And so the role of angels and archangels and that myth, and giants, because the ancient parts of the Bible have these other kinds of demigods that are not so different from ancient Greece. And it has a council of gods sitting together in the plural. So there was this proto-Jewish period, what you can call First Temple Judaism, where the idea of divinity and cosmology was quite a bit different, and where angels and archangels played a significant role, and where part of the fall from heaven was that there was interbreeding between angels and humans, giving rise to what you might call titans, or I don't know, some kind of demigods. So that's a whole drama of gods at war with gods, which is again not so different from what you get in polytheistic religions in ancient Europe. And as you can imagine, there were a lot of Jews and Christians who are very uncomfortable with that kind of evidence of the Bible. This is another topic, but still today, still in the normal King James Bible, in normal mainstream Bibles, God does not say of mankind, let us make him in my image. He says, let us make him in our image. And thousands of pages have been written about the use of the plural there, that it was referring to gods in the plural, and so these are little fragments of that. This is true. All right. Anyway, back to Buddhism, and should you be concerned? so I can talk about this on a shallow level and I can talk about it on a profound level. I think I've already alluded to the fact there's tremendous diversity in what Buddhism really is today in terms of what they believe and what they practice. It does include some of the most extreme and terrible cult-like practices imaginable. If you just look around, you can read about Buddhist monks ordering their followers to go out in the desert and starve themselves and then people dying. I've read examples of that, of, obscene, self-harming meditative practices where people stab themselves or burn themselves. And that also has a long history that's not brand new. It's not part of the most ancient period of Buddhism. It's not part of original or pure Buddhism, whatever you want to say. But we do have more than a millennium of that kind of interpretation of Buddhism. I mentioned you an especially corrupt form, Nichiren Buddhism, well, that's way out in Japan and so on. Yeah. So there is this diversity that can include terrible and cult-like forms of Buddhism. And you may ask, how do you start off with 3 such simple principles? Life is suffering, all is impermanent, and there is no soul. How do you start off with those 3 and end up with these terrible practices? How do you start off with the Bible and end up with Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer? It's a long story. You know what I mean? We got 2,500 years of history, and a lot of people do kind of lament that Buddhism hasn't remained true to its philosophical moorings. But on this shallow level, yeah, you can easily get bogged down in the details of what order and what kind of practice it is. I assume, based on the email I got, that I am talking about a modern, white, Western person, not an Asian person. So they most likely are approaching this conceptually, where they're starting with the philosophy, they're starting with the core beliefs, they're starting with the core ideas of Buddhism, some of them already mentioned, and then they're committing to that. And then they're deciding, okay, I'm going to deal with whatever temple I can deal with. I'm going to deal with the management of the temple. They're leaving that until many stages later. They may even not be thinking that much about the historical tradition or the discipline, the actual list of rules you have to live by as a monk and how they're enforced and how they're practiced. It may sound like a joke now, but whether or not you're allowed to wear shoes matters. Whether or not you're allowed to only eat out of one bowl matters. Whether or not you're allowed to drive a car or ride a bicycle. For Buddhist monks, which kind of Buddhism are you signing up to? These rules really restrict your life in some obvious ways, both what the rules are on paper and how they're really put in practice. And obviously, there's living in celibacy and the most strict forms of Buddhism. You are literally not allowed to touch money. So you have nothing to do with money. You don't have a bank account. You never buy anything. You don't touch money if you're really living by that code. And the most corrupt forms of Buddhism, some of the monks are millionaires. I mean, some of them drive a Lexus or drive a Ferrari. They drive expensive cars, and they're totally corrupt, and they're actively soliciting donations. So yeah, on that level, there's a lot of diversity. However, given that this is basically advice for a white Western audience approaching this ancient religion, the question itself named the issue of nirvana. I think that probably is on this person's mind. The concept of nirvana. Is nirvana real? Is it something to live for? Is it something to die for? Or is it a reason to live by this discipline or what have you? Now, I've got to tell you, so I haven't gotten into my own background. I was a scholar of Buddhism for more than 10 years. I don't want to get into a length of, if I tell you about what I did in the more than 10 years I studied Buddhism, it's a much longer video. But I have met with and studied with some famous monks and been to famous monasteries, as well as famous modern Western secular scholars, academics, what have you. I had a really diverse, deep background in Buddhism. I've got to tell you, from my perspective, no, nirvana is not real. When you're talking about nirvana, you're talking about something which, long story short, is the product of hallucination. And it's very clear, I think, reading the original texts in the original language, that what you're reading are descriptions of hallucinatory experiences. And you can read exactly how people induced and had those hallucinatory experiences. And even the debates between monks, because it's not going to be consistent. Not everyone's going to have the same kind of hallucination, what their different hallucinations mean and how they relate to this philosophy. So already there, you've got a pretty good idea of the basis for an ancient religion. You've got a monastic discipline, you've got a philosophy, and then you also have a set of what we now call meditative practices. But even you have to really stop and question, what do we mean by the word meditation? It's a very modern European Western concept. Ultimately, we mostly know it as a Catholic concept, and then partly through ancient Greek and Latin sources that we talk about meditation. The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, that's where the word comes from. However, we have these practices that are linked to hallucinations, which include, for example, the hallucination of remembering your former lives, remembering your former incarnations. So for a lot of people, that is a religious experience. Under whatever conditions, maybe starving themselves and sitting in a cave, they induce this hallucinatory state, and they see thousands of years in the past, that in the past they were incarnated as this person or that person. They see the futility of continuing the cycle of birth, which very explicitly in this context means of having your own children, of having sex, and of reproducing that way. They see, in terms of classical Buddhist philosophy and ethics and cosmology, they see that good deeds and bad deeds lead to punishments in your reincarnations, whether that means going to hell or something bad happening to you, or being reincarnated as a monkey or something, being reincarnated as an animal, this kind of thing. There is a cosmology and so on, and very explicitly, Buddhism, both in ancient times and today, is based on seeing these things. Many people forcibly misinterpret those texts as if they're talking about empirical experience. All the texts talk about seeing for yourself, knowing these things for yourself. That's based on the confidence that you will actually have this hallucinatory experience. You will see these things, and then you'll believe. And Buddhism very actively claims that it's different from other religions, because Buddhism doesn't require you to believe in things that are unseen. It doesn't require you to have faith in supernatural things that are unseen. But that's very clear. The reason for that is that ancient Buddhists were confident you would actually see these things for yourself. And for most of human history, human beings thought they saw ghosts. Like, we see this in all cultures, including Europe. People routinely saw things like ghosts and demons. What they were actually seeing, from my perspective, I'm a nihilist. I don't believe in any of that stuff, but I believe human beings have dreams. I believe they have hallucinations. I believe sometimes they overinterpret, seeing a shadow or, whatever it was they really saw or experienced. They put this sort of a religious significance on it. So this is part of the answer to the question. The other part of the question was positively, why would someone want to do this? Already implicit in what I've said so far, there's some reasons why you wouldn't want to do this. One reason why you wouldn't want to do it is that the vast majority of Buddhism as it exists today is unbelievably corrupt. That's already been kind of alluded to. Another is that the core religious experience is hallucinatory and incompatible with reality. Keeping it all the way real here, people, sorry. So, no, nirvana is not something you can attain or experience. It's not real. It's a myth. And most religions are built on myths. And I think we can say, to give Buddhism credit, the myth of nirvana is probably more interesting and more philosophical than the myth of Hercules, a myth millions of people believed in as a religion for many years, or, in my opinion, the myth of Jesus rising from the dead. I'm not really going to plan my calendar around Easter because there's this story, or the myth of Noah and the ark. I can't believe Americans love that. American Christians just go nuts for that Noah and the ark thing. I don't know why. It's not that great a story. You know what I mean? It's just a myth, right? But let me tell you, on the positive side, if you become a Buddhist monk, again, this is across all traditions from Japan to Sri Lanka, you can get a lot done in a day. If you're at a good monastery, not even going to unpack what I mean by good, let's say you're at a good monastery, you wake up every day at 5:30 in the morning. You maybe have 1 hour of chores to do during that day, things like sweeping the floor and cleaning the toilet, but you don't cook. You don't worry about cooking. You don't worry about making money. You don't worry about what you're going to do tomorrow. You don't worry about the future. You don't have worries. You wake up at 5:30 a.m., you're living this totally sober, totally disciplined, lifestyle in a monastery that enables you to do so. If you're into poetry, and historically many Buddhist monks were, you can study ancient poetry, you can write your own modern poetry. If you're into philosophy, of course, that would also be rewarded. You can study ancient philosophy, you can write original new philosophy. If you were into history and archaeology, as a Buddhist monk, obviously the history and archaeology of Buddhism or of Buddhist countries, you could be pouring your time and energy into that. And although it is not as common, obviously if what you're interested in was humanitarian work, whether that's helping elderly people or children or people starving or people in an area destroyed by an earthquake, whatever those inclinations you have, scholarly or humanitarian, you have an ocean of time. You have a great opportunity to devote yourselves to those things entirely. And I've lived enough of that lifestyle. I remember living at one Buddhist monastery in particular where I would walk down the mountain to the library at the end of the path So wake up in the morning. When I was first there, I did attend the morning rituals. They did a morning meditation and chanting in front of the statue. That got repetitive quick. After a couple of days, I think I just woke up and went straight to the library. I didn't participate in that. But you wake up early. You maybe have some trivial duties, in terms of cleaning things up, but you can devote yourself to the life of the mind to an unbelievable extent and still have enough free time to become a master of Kung Fu. At that same monastery, I remember one little old man who picked out the wooden staff and was doing Kung Fu with the rising sun, as a lifestyle. Believe it or not, there's a lot that's appealing about it, including the enormous potential to do positive and good things for people. Like, you're at a Buddhist temple, someone comes in, they're heartbroken because their father just died, they're arranging for the funeral. People come in because they're anorexic and they're trying to get over anorexia, or they're an alcoholic and they're trying to quit drinking. People come in with all kinds of human problems. There's that element, the same as being a pastor in Christianity. There's that element of hope. But sure, whether it's on a scholarly side or on a humanitarian side, it is a lifestyle supported by this religion with all its superstition and all its contradictory history, sometimes preaching nonviolence and sometimes hypocritically preaching violence. There's all kinds of contradictions and problems in the history of Buddhism. But this question from an atheist was, why would my friend choose to convert to Buddhism? Why would they commit to being a Buddhist monk until they died? Even with everything I've just told you in this video, I can think of a lot of good reasons. I can think of a lot of compelling reasons why any person of substance would choose to make their peace with Buddhism, to say, okay, I understand this religion, I understand what's wrong with it, what's right with it, the advantages and disadvantages, and to say, this is the way I'm going to make my mark in the world. Especially at a time when so much of organized education and so many career paths are just a ripoff. You know what I mean? Compared to taking the next 8 years of your life and getting a PhD, or even going to nurses' college or something. By the way, you can combine this. I've been to Buddhist monasteries that are attached to a teaching hospital, where Buddhist monks can actually study and become, for humanitarian work, can become nurses or paramedics or what have you. So even that's not mutually exclusive, But compared to so many career paths, if you want to make a positive difference in the world, this is one where you can get started right away. And the only price is your soul.
I have a question. Yeah, one of my friends from high school, we don't really actually talk anymore. I just noticed that he recently converted to Buddhism, but he's not a Buddhist monk. Yeah. So what are the benefits to just being a Buddhist monk, just being a Buddhist, rather than being a monk?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, so this is a white Western person, right?
Yes.
Well, I mean, not too long ago, there was this hilarious moment, live stream where I talked to Ryan from Happy Healthy Vegan. Oh, yeah. So Ryan lives in California. He's a Western person. He described himself as Buddhist. Mm-hmm. But when I asked him, okay, well, what temple are you a part of? Many Buddhists say, what lineage are you a part of? I think I also said to him, well, what tradition are you a part of? His only answer was, the internet. No, he has no connection to a real Buddhist establishment.
In, garb,
okay.
Buddhist. I don't know.
I think that's
becoming a monk. But
right. No, but I mean, I think that's the step. Is are you part of Buddhism as an actually existing religion? Yeah. Some kind of temple, some kind of tradition, or are you just someone who read a book or read a bunch of stuff on the internet and decided to start describing yourself as Buddhist? But yeah, there are formal. I
suppose it would be the same advantages of being a part of a church, but I don't know.
Well, okay, it's different. Number one, if you are a Buddhist layperson, you have to take a commitment to nonviolence seriously. Mm-hmm. In terms of the basic precepts a layperson lives by, one is total abstention from alcohol or any kind of mind-altering drug, which we already do. And it is hypocritical. Buddhism is not vegan. It's not even vegetarianism. But there is this incredibly broad commitment to nonviolence. And quite a few professions are, cut off in that way. I remember reading an email. It wasn't to me. It was an email sent to a Buddhist monk that I got a copy of. Buddhist monks used to send me. I used to get a lot of email from Buddhist monks. Also, you can spend a lot of time writing email if you're living that lifestyle, But and this guy was a small aircraft pilot in northern Canada, where we have a lot of mosquitoes, and he was taking the Buddhist precept of nonviolence serious enough that he described going up in this small aircraft and carefully bagging the mosquitoes and black flies. Because when you get up to a high enough altitude, the air thins out, and these insects, they drop to the ground. They're not dead. They drop to the ground inert because they can't keep flying. Yeah, and he put. I know.
So
it's touching and hilarious, and that's if you take nonviolence seriously. That's you. And he kept them alive in a bag, and then when the airplane landed, he went out the back of the airplane, opened the bag, and they flew free, right? So I mean, if you take nonviolence seriously, if you take some of those basic concepts seriously, then yes, it will change your life. But obviously we're living in a majority Buddhist town. And we were recently in Thailand. I mean, we were, in downtown Bangkok, Thailand. It's hard to see. Okay, I can see. I mean, I have enough years of expertise. I can see the ways in which that society is shaped by Buddhism. And downtown Bangkok, it still is better than and different than living in Saudi Arabia. It really is different than living in a Muslim society. So Buddhism has shaped everything. However, yes, it's obvious the vast majority of people who describe themselves as Buddhists don't take any of the precepts seriously. And certainly, I mean, a lot of them, they can't even answer questions when you ask about cosmology or what it is they supposedly believe in. So I'd say, though, one funny thing about Buddhism for lay people, this is a good question to ask. It is a bit like trying to believe in the religion of Socrates, trying to believe in ancient Greek philosophy, in that you're definitely confronted with a great many things that are just so ancient, nobody can believe in them. Like the world map that's in Buddhism. Same thing with ancient Greece. Their idea about what was the shape of the world, and you're looking very similar to ancient Greece. I mean, the ancient Greeks talked about Mount Olympus kind of being at the center of the world, and at the top of Mount Olympus were the gods. It's the same thing in ancient Buddhism. At the middle of the world is this giant mountain called Mount Sumeru, and the gods live at the top of the mountain, and they have this idea of the shape of the world, and the world is flat, and there's this steam coming up below the world and supporting it, and if you meditate improperly, that can cause earthquakes because the whole world is floating, and that's, it's just a really genuinely ancient, and this is really 2,500 years ago in India. This is how they saw the world. I've mentioned on this channel before, they thought of the sun as something quite small in the sky. So Buddhist monks, when they were flying like Superman, they believed a Buddhist monk could fly through the sky and touch the surface of the sun with his fingertips. So completely incompatible with our view of the solar system. We view the sun as something enormous, very far away. They view the sun as something quite close and tangible, that birds could touch with their wings even. That was their idea of the sun. So there are a lot of things like that which are outside of questions of faith. People who read Socrates or Aristotle, nobody asks, well, do you believe in this? There are all kinds of elements of Socrates, Aristotle, any ancient Greek philosopher that to us are just preposterous. They just reflect an ancient attempt to understand what is life, what is the world. In the same way, so much of the material, it's outside of any consideration of true and false. But at the same time, sure, I mean, this has a corpus of literature, poetry, philosophy that people still find beautiful and meaningful. And I think the challenge for Buddhist lay people, long story short, is can you make this philosophy and this tradition meaningful in your life today? The same way that a director, like a movie director, would look at a script by Shakespeare and say, how can I make this meaningful for audiences today? Like a large part of what's there in Shakespeare today, people can't relate to. It's not real to our lives. People don't just whip out swords and fight duels anymore. You know what I mean? Like there are a lot of things have changed. A lot of things have changed since Shakespeare wrote. A lot of social and ethical considerations. Mm-hmm. But we can do it. It's an artistic challenge. It's a creative challenge. You say, okay, this is still meaningful in our lives today. I think Shakespeare. A lot of people read Shakespeare at funerals. Shakespeare gets quoted at funerals and weddings. Where people take out some poem of Shakespeare, some quotation all the time, right? So in that same way, I think there's this challenge of taking something ancient and applying it to our lives today. And if you're serious about Buddhism, then you're serious about taking on that challenge.